Quick show of hands in the chat. Has anybody ever wanted to make a game that's actually here? Have you ever been like, man, I've got an idea?
Just games in general, too.
Hi!
Yeah, not just video games. We're not talking video games. There's no digital aspect needed, though we will eventually go into more details on, if you want to get into video games, the places you should go and the things you're going to have to do. But we're just starting out with games. Even a board game. You even got 5 friends over here. You're playing a card game. You've got all these cards, and you're like, man, let's make our own game out of these cards. Same process follows. It does not change. All right, so I'm guessing those hands are shows of hands, that we have at least a few people that have been interested in making games in the past. So, I've wanted to make games since I was a kid. I just couldn't ever narrow down what part of the process I'd want to be a part of. Well, we're talking about the whole process. Just being the mastermind and flushing out a whole idea. We've done this a few times, and it's pretty fun. Even if it doesn't get made, you might play it with friends or something, do some playtesting. It's a fun process. I really, really enjoy making games. As you might tell. The channel may give it away. Just a little bit.
Sorry, I'm zoning out real hard here. Did some crash reports come in, but yeah, it can seem very overwhelming for making a game because there's so much that goes into it. But you can really, break it down to smaller chunks and more kind of digestible things. Like video games, of course, are super complicated, but the actual medium they're played on isn't necessarily the game. You can make the game itself before it's a video game, and then then implement it as a video game. It doesn't have to exist in that virtual form to begin with. You can for making any game, the starting point is just pen and paper. You just get a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, and you can just jot down ideas. You can just jot down how you think things will go, and you can kind of just design in your head or plan it down, what the game will be, and you can use that to describe. You can use that to kind of imagine what it would be like. And even if the game doesn't physically exist anywhere yet, it'll exist after reading it. You can kind of play it just in your mind and kind of have an idea of, hey, that'd be kind of fun. Hey, this would be kind of interesting to do. This would be kind of a neat idea.
Time to relax.
And it doesn't have to be a video game. It could be a board game. It could be, something with tabletop, deck of cards, and anything like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I've got a story to start with, right? Before we get into part 1, we've got the bot now spamming this document. It'll come up in a moment. But as we start, I've got a little story to kind of help put everything into context for you guys. Because the first part is honestly, you're going to, like, if you've never done it and you're told what the first part is, you're going to be like, oh, that doesn't sound fun. Because the first part is a lot of documentation and writing down ideas. It's the design guide. It really is the place to start. And you have to start there. You need to have that idea in concrete of where we're going and where we're starting and what we're doing. So, the story. I joined a Discord for a community. Hey, Ancaria, welcome. Nice to see you. So I joined this Discord, and I jump in, and I'm just, I'm not looking to do anything, but I'm just making friends and meeting people. I was new to Twitch. I was finding my way through the Twitch communities and feeling out where I want to be and who I like and who I don't. Hey, Eternal, how you doing? Welcome. I was figuring all this stuff out. I ran into some guy who's making a card game. I was like, hey, that's right up my alley. I just finished making a big, complicated card game. It was a ton of fun. I loved it. I love card games. I love designing card games. One of my favorite things. So I'm like, hey, I'll help you. Sure. I won't have a ton of time to make this a big complicated project, but I'd love to help you because you're making a Final Fantasy card game. And guess what? I actually really like Final Fantasy too. So Final Fantasy, one of my favorite things. Card games, one of my favorite things. I'm hooked. I'm in. Let's do this. Let's have some fun. Let's get creative. So I'm looking through all the cards he's made, and every single one of them has abilities and moves and terms that are never mentioned on any of the other cards. I was like, wow, okay, you got a design guide or something for how we're playing this game? And I haven't figured that part out yet. Well, how are you making cards for the game if you don't know the rules for the game yet? So I threw together a simple design document to help get them started. Really, really, really easy things like how many cards are in the player's hand. Things you need to consider like this. How is it going to be played? So I gave him the design document. Like, here, man, here's a simple design document to kind of get us on the same page and get us started. And as he's reading through, he goes, I never even considered if the players would have a hand or not. Well, you know what? That's a really important thing to figure out before you make the cards. You have to know how the cards are being played to make them. You can't start on that forward step. So if he were to have followed along with that game and tried to make it, when he actually went to do anything with it, he would have found that all of his cards are nonsensical. Nothing's the same. Nothing works together. Nothing's designed to work together because everything was kind of made in its own little bubble, just thinking about that character in the game. You need that design guide. Really, really, really bad.
Design guide, or even just like you want to start with the rules of the game and kind of what the restraints are going to be, what the system is, because what games are kind of interactive systems. They're bound by artificial rules, and the point of that is, implementing artificial rules and limitations is what kind of provides that fun. When you look at even sports, soccer, you can't touch the ball with your hands, all this kind of stuff. There's a whole lot of rules and stuff like that that come down to what actually make the game. It's a difference between just kicking a ball on a field versus an actual competitive match. So you kind of want to figure out what your rules are. So for the example, for soccer, how many people are allowed in each team? Are we allowed just to have 30 on each, and it's just going to be like a giant cluster? Do you want to have it just be like a 2-on-2, a 3-on-3? Okay, well, what's the goal going to be? Like, how, if the game has a win condition, we kind of want to go through, is there a way to win? Is there a way to lose? What's kind of the purpose of things? Why are they restricted? What are they supposed to be doing? You can kind of break all this stuff down and kind of just bullet point. And then from there, you take that and use it kind of as your design guideline. You kind of want to put restrictions in place because the restrictions are kind of what are going to allow you to have a lot of creativity in solving the problem and adding things to your game to kind of make it fun. In the case for a card game, you can put a lot of restrictions in, like, well, how many cards can they have in their hand at once? Well, maybe it's you can only have 5 cards, and then that kind of when you go to design your cards, you can keep that in mind. Well, if they can only have 5, they're going to have to make sure that the 5 they have are solid, or maybe they're going to want to have cards that allow them to swap out or swap in or clear their hand or reshuffle, or if they're allowed just to have as many cards in their hand as possible. Well, maybe you want some cards that'll allow them to, draw 5 or 10 cards, or let them keep packing up their hand if that's advantageous or not. So there's a bunch of stuff in there. So the first thing you kind of want to do is figure out the rules, figure out the restraints of the system. And like I said, games, not just video games, but all games, they are just interactive systems. That's all they really are. You're kind of going into a thing. There's a term for it called the magic circle. And what that is when players come together to play a game, they all kind of agree to step into this magic circle. It doesn't physically exist, but they all kind of, suspend reality for a sec. They all submit themselves to these artificial rules. For soccer, I now, if you're entering the magic circle soccer, you now, submit yourself to the idea that you're not just going to pick up the ball and run with it and throw it into the net. That's kind of the idea you want. So you start off with just the rules, the very basic kind of things, and these will change as you go forward, but this is kind of like the groundwork and the framework of your game.
So let's quickly touch on what Val just said there, and that's great advice, Val. Don't try to be 100% original. That's the worst thing you can do for your game. And video games are no different than board games. And in video games, we are always, always, always preaching how much new you should really have. And it's not 100%. It's significantly less than that. Does anybody in chat remember what we always say your new percentage should be for your game? Give it a second for the Twitch lag to catch up to the chat and them a moment to type. I'm guessing 5 to 10%. Spot on, Glenn. About 10%. 10% new is where you want to aim for. 90% of your systems should be seen before, understood. The player should be able to pick it up and go, I know what I'm doing here, and carry on. Because if it's 100% new, it's just frustrating. It's just a pain in the ass to learn how to play it. It's so much more than needs to be, and you have no idea how it's going to turn out. Players really like things they recognize. They really do. Like how many times have you heard somebody play a video game and they go, oh, it had some RPG elements to it. I loved it. It added so much to the game. RPG elements are nothing new. They've been used in games since the beginning of video games, pretty much. They're ancient. They existed before video games because they started in the pen and paper era, where the first RPGs on computer were literally just trying to copy pen and paper. They were 0% new. But they were 100% new because it was all digital and no one had ever done that before. It's not the content that's new, it's the approach. So yeah, 90% old, 10% new. Don't try to be super original. Take something that's awesome and modify it a little bit. That's the best way to do it. Something that they recognize, but then a new sauce on it so that it has a new flavor. You'll hear us use those terms a lot. There's meat and potatoes, and then there's sauce, right? Your meat and potatoes of your game is all your core, ground, basic elements. And then the sauce is the fancy 10% new that's put on top of your meat and potatoes. Right? Well, it's a great analogy because even if a game does not have any of that sauce, even if it's just the 90% meat and potatoes, if those meat and potatoes are really well done, it's still a great meal. Who doesn't like a well done steak and a, not like well done, like overcooked, but like a perfectly cooked steak and a baked potato? You don't need sauce. It's delicious. As long as it's perfectly done. You add sauce, it can get it interesting, but it's still good. Still good the way it is. All right, what else do we think we want to list in this design guide? Let's pull up an actual design guide. I don't have one on me.
I might have a few. Let's see if I can find one. Yeah, sorry, I got a bit distracted last bit.
Yeah, no worries.
When you want to make a game, like, don't worry about, if it's ever going to get made. Don't worry about the complexity of it. Just if you think you have a good idea, just start writing it down and start going with it. You never know where it might lead. You never know, what might come of it. Even if you have a really big idea, maybe you'll find something smaller from it that is, a bit more digestible that you can kind of implement. Or, even if you just have the ideas are fun to come up with. It's really fun just to kind of make, game ideas, and then like prototyping something isn't as complicated as actually making something, and it's the first step after the initial design. When you go to make a game, it doesn't matter if it's video or tabletop, is you kind of have a general idea, you put down the general rules of the systems, and then the next thing you want to do is prototype it. And the point of prototyping is that when you have your own ideas, everyone kind of just like, when you have an idea, everyone, like, at least for me personally, you have an idea, it's your idea, so of course it's great. It's the whole point of it. You wouldn't be excited about it if it wasn't a great idea. The thing is that ideas in the brain and ideas on paper don't always translate well to the actual mediums, or translate well, like when you actually go to play them. Something can sound really fun in your head, but then when you try it out, like, oh, actually this is, isn't too great. Actually, it's kind of repetitive, or, it's kind of boring. So when you design something, if you're ready to go the next step, the first thing you'll want to do is then prototype it. And you don't have to, exactly prototype it in like a full, if it's like a video game, it doesn't actually have to be in code or anything like that. You can still prototype it with pen and paper, or with, even just in your head, or you can use things that already exist to kind of, mimic what it would be like. There's a lot of games out there that are sandbox that you can kind of mod to, kind of fit the game that you're working on. And those are kind of very powerful tools to use.
For sure. I'm looking for a little design guide sample here, because I remember when I was first sitting down with a design guide, I was going, oh my god, I have no idea how to start. Can I even do this? And instantly, because I'm sitting there with a blank piece of paper and having to come up with all these ideas myself with absolutely no structure or form, imposter syndrome sinks right in. Right in. Oh man, I am useless. I can't do this. Man, that framework helps so much. Just having that little bit of structure, so you don't even need to think. You just start answering questions. It's just basically a big sheet with questions about your game. The only difference is it's not a game that exists yet. So you can't answer the questions from another guide. You've got to come up with the answers yourself. And then you play it, and you try it, and you find out, oh wow, this idea is terrible. And you refine from there. That's what Pseudo was talking about with the playtesting. There's a general piece of information while I'm looking for one to show you. Don't be attached to your ideas. Don't be attached to your ideas. How you doing? We're doing great. How you doing, Lucky? You ever wanted to make a game before? Have you ever tried to make a game before? Design a game before? I bet that engine took a few iterations before it becomes the one they've been reusing now, and they probably tweak it for each game. Platinum Games are reusing pretty much the same combat engine. Yep, combat system. Yep. Yeah, and I mean, again, with the 90% old, 10% new. Why replace their whole combat system? And people keep saying, every game has the same combat as Bayonetta. People praised that game's combat. People love all their other games that they're making. The combat's fantastic in all the games that they make. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. It basically has Bayonetta's combat. Who cares? The game's amazing. Everything fit. It's not like they plucked the combat system out and dropped it into something that didn't make sense. Totally felt natural in the game. Completely fit. I made over 1 million pieces of enemies by the end of that game. It was amazing. Bayonetta combat system in Dark Souls. I mean, you'd have to change a lot of mechanics and ideas, but you could make it work. You can make anything work as long as you change enough of the system around it to adhere. That's the beauty. That's the beauty. I went to make a game recently and I just like pulled up a design document and started answering questions on it. Download game design guide. Why didn't that give me what I need? You know what? Screw you, Google. DuckDuckGo. Give me what I need. Game design software, 10 free game making software, game career guide, the basics of game design tutorial PDF. Do you have what I need?
This should be a game design document.
I know there should be. No, this is all C++, algorithms, video game development in Unity. So no wonder nobody can make games anymore. As soon as you go to try to figure it out, they're like, here, go learn programming. That's not how you make a game. You have no idea what you're writing. You can't program your game if your game isn't laid out in front of you on the document so you know what you're trying to make. That make sense? Does that make sense to everybody? You can't make what you're trying to make if you don't know what you're making. It'd be like trying to build a doghouse and having absolutely no idea what you plan for the doghouse to finish, but you've still got boards and you're nailing them together. That's the analogy there. Does that make sense? I mean, no, it doesn't, but do you understand the analogy?
I sent you the Diablo game design document.
Oh, nice. Nice. That's a wonderful way to start. Diablo game pitch. I love it. I love it. Can I get it to look right in here? Not really. Let's try to just do this. Pull you down a bit. Go.
No, maybe this isn't. No, is it? No, yeah, okay.
Game concept by Condor Inc. There we go. Game design. Diablo is a role play. Okay, so overview. A nice place to start, right? Are you on the document, Pseudo?
I am now.
Okay. Do you want to take notes while I talk about this? Because I have them overlaying each other.
Sure.
So, very, very first heading. Overview. Right? Diablo is a role-playing game wherein a player creates a single character and guides him through a dungeon in an attempt to find and destroy Diablo, the devil himself. All the action takes place in an isometric, three-quarter perspective with diamond-shaped square floor spaces. The entire game operates on a turn-based system using a mouse. The player moves his character from space to space, exploring corridors and rooms and engaging in combat. So you can already tell that this isn't exactly how Diablo ended up, because it didn't end up turn-based. They ended up making it a real-time turn-based game. So there are turns going on in a turn-based system, but then they just added a clock to it, so that the turn-based could continue to move even if you don't. The character faces challenges in the form of hostile monsters and traps in his quest to descend deeper into the dungeon. Many beneficial weapons and magic items can be acquired and used to help on the quest. Ticks still turn-based? No, they're not anymore, but this was the original idea for the document. Right? Now, you're not always going to end up with exactly what your document was, but you're mostly what this document is when we talk about Diablo. It still, it sounds like Diablo. By this explanation, you get Diablo. You could see how they could build Diablo off of this guide, right? It's not super complicated. Just put as many details as you can. Okay, so if you're watching this and you're getting ready on your overview and you're like, I have no idea yet, don't put it down. Move on. Come back. Update the document. This isn't a top to bottom process. This is an organic process. As we get our ideas, we put them where they fit. The guide will build itself as we go, and once everything's filled out, we've got a pretty damn good idea of what we're going to do. Again, don't tie yourself to this. This is a guide, not a rule book. A guide, a pitch, a proposal. Nothing set in stone yet. A new dungeon level is generated each time a level is entered using our dynamic random level generation system, which was way ahead of its time. Systems, rooms, corridors, traps, treasures, monsters, and stairways will be randomly placed, providing a new gaming experience every time Diablo is played. In addition to random halls and rooms, larger set-piece areas like a maze or a crypt complex will be pre-designed and appear intact in the level. This system facilitates the inclusion of puzzles and traps and helps the addition of thematic elements. Deeper levels will contain progressively more difficult creatures and hazards. A character's quest ends when the defeat of Diablo located deep in the dungeon. So we've got how it's played, what it's going to look like, how the player's going to influence it, how the player wins, how the player loses, what the goal is, what the player has to help him. It's a really, really nice overview. Really, really nice overview. Plot and setting after summary. A little self-explanatory, but do we all know what a plot is? Do we all know what a setting is? Any questions around that, let me know. Gameplay. A walkthrough of an example game session, which is always a lovely thing to have. When you're designing it, so this is one of my strengths, something I'm really good at, and I do a lot, and not everybody is good at, and not everybody can do as well. Some people need to play it. I really like this little picture of the dungeon. See, we've got the town layout, and you come into the dungeon, and it just goes down and down and down and down and down and down. This isn't the layout of the town that they used, but it gets the image across. It gets the point across, right? Playing it in your head. That's what I do. I play entire matches in my head, from beginning to end. Let's do this. Let's see where it goes. When I was making my last card game, I was creating decks and just imagining draws and plays and exchanges between players because you want it to feel a certain way when you play it. I can do that in my head, luckily. You might need to print out some cards. Some people aren't as mental as me. Some people are more visual. Some people are more tactile. Some people really want to touch and move and twist and turn and play with the cards. Everybody's got their own style to how they're making their game. Pseudo's just agreeing with me, I think. When Pseudo's quiet, he's just agreeing with me or reading crash reports.
Yeah. Like you're saying, it's not solidified in stone. And you'll notice from most game design documents that a lot change, and that just comes down to that happens with any project. If you have any major project over any major period of time, you're going to start having to cut things or adjust things or run into limitations. You run into whatever. So it's just kind of what happens. So don't get set in stone, but what you should do is still find what is like your core game features and mechanics, and those should probably be set in stone, because an important thing about this document, the point of doing game design documents, is to have direction. It's something that people who've probably tried doing amateur game design in the past or tried making a game on their own is without direction and without some sort of guide, you kind of just go all over the place. It's hard to focus on what you're supposed to be doing. It's hard to you'll be working one thing here because you're just excited. You want to work on stuff, but you don't really have, an order of things to work on. You don't really have a to-do list. You're kind of just ad hocing whatever is in your brain. You're kind of just going right at it. And then you're kind of just jumping around, and you'll find that after months and months and months, you've never really made progress because you kind of just keep re-implementing what you have, or you'll remove it and add something else. So you'll, the idea can keep changing, and you'll keep, basically undoing and redoing what you've done. But if you have a design document and you identify your core main mechanics, your core main features, and stuff you absolutely want to implement, then that at least gives you some restrictions. It's one of those things that it seems kind of weird to do, but a really a key tool in game design is restrictions. The more restrictions you can put into there, typically kind of the better, because it makes you have to be a bit more creative, and also kind of, helps you with your scope. It sucks because, they're restrictions and they can feel restrictive, but, getting around them is kind of a good thing. And kind of an example of what like a core mechanic would be. And I would be looking back at like, the original like GTA, like the ability to, drive your car around, to get out of the car and kind of do all that stuff would be, kind of a great original like game mechanic idea. Originally, GTA wasn't spec'd or designed to be a, kind of chaotic, super violent game. It was just supposed to be kind of a racing game. It was called Race and Chase. And what ended up happening is, so they were prototyping the game out and they were making it, and then, like I was saying before, when you prototype, sometimes it may not be that fun. And they kind of made a cops and robbers game, and it was okay. It wasn't that exciting, it wasn't that fun, but there was a bug that kind of made the police super aggressive. Like they just went for you. They came in and went crazy for you, and then they're like, hey, that's actually really fun. Hey, that's kind of a good thing. And then they, modify the game's not going to do it, but at its core, the game is still, you're driving cars around fast, you're getting out of it, you're getting into new cars, you're doing that stuff. That's fine. But then you can kind of tweak the sauce of that stuff, the kind of enhancements, what's exciting about it. But they kept that the same. If they started trying to mess with that or change that up, now they kind of have to redo their prototypes. They kind of go back into like a dev hell, and that's how games end up taking, 5 to 10 years.
That's also how, if it's an indie project and not a project you're getting paid for, projects just get dropped and forgotten about. People get frustrated. People walk away. Oh, I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore. I've tried this so many times. I've redone this so many times. Blah 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 blah. I can't get this to work. The negativity sets in. Just get an idea and go with it. Until you've played it and tested it and understand why it should be changed, don't change it. Just go with it, even if it's not the best. You have something idea that's better later on. Jot it down as a note. Maybe make this change. Keep your original idea though. Stay with it. Stay with it until you have like a really, really strong reason to change. Okay, next section, marketing. Now, if you're an indie, this isn't important. Well, I mean, sorry, if you're an amateur, this isn't important. If you're just like, I want to make a game for me, you're not worried about how you're going to market it. That's fine. You don't need to worry about this part. But if you're making a game as a product, it needs to be marketable. Now, I don't want to go into this section too much, but
yeah, a key difference is like, you don't have to make money for making games. Everyone, it's really nice. A lot of people want that kind of, but you should just be able to make the game for the sake of making the game. And marketing is something that kind of will come later, and that's more, designed for bigger projects of scope. We're kind of mostly talking about, you as an individual just kind of want to start making games on your own, as a hobby. So you don't really have to worry too much about it being marketable. That's mostly down the line when, you've got a solid product, things are starting to look good, and marketing is, getting it out there, making sure it gets exposure, as well as, trying to get it in front of publishers, trying to get someone to take it. But at least if you're starting, you don't really have to worry about marketing. You just, got to focus on making the game fun. That stuff can all come later.
Development. The development plan we can probably do a light section on, because again, we're more worried about the design side of it right now to keep everything in design. But if you can consider your development process, if you really want to turn it into a game, it's definitely good to consider it, because it may guide how you design it.
Yeah, this is kind of it's a bit more important for actually, it's important for both tabletop and virtual. Depending on what you're going to be using for your game, if it's a tabletop game, let's say you want custom pieces, or if you want, a custom deck with custom cards, you're going to have to develop those. You have to, design them logically what they're going to do, but also you have to get the physical pieces, and that can kind of be a bit of a challenge. It could be kind of expensive depending on how far you want to go with this. Maybe you just steal some pieces from Monopoly and use that. And as for the virtual side of things, it's really important as well to kind of keep what you're trying to do in scope. This happens to everybody, and the first time they're trying to make a game is they get way too ambitious. Everyone always wants to make like, an MMO, or they want to make some vast open world thing. It's exciting. You don't know your own limitations. It's kind of like Dunning-Kruger effect of, you don't know enough to know that, how hard this stuff is really going to be, because it's all just excitement at this point.
Let's just be clear for a quick second. It's not only the indies and the amateurs that scope way too big and bite off more than they can chew. We got Spore as well, all right? We're not saying only you guys do it. Everyone overestimates the game they can make. Scoping is the most important thing, big or small.
Even look at Cyberpunk.
Oh yeah, Cyberpunk was way more than they could chew. That actually, Cyberpunk reminds me of when we gave my cat a piece of steak the size of its head, and instead of chewing pieces off, it tried to swallow it whole.
Eef.
100%. Always start with some small projects. If you want to make a big, real project, you've got to have some experience under your belt first, right?
Yeah.
Think of a band. Are you ever going to release a major international album if you've never made an independent garage album in your life?
Technically, maybe, but the chances are going to be slim. But we're not going to say that you can't. I mean, if you have a real one, a real good idea, you can take a swing at it. It's just that's kind of how a lot of people's first ideas go off. It's that first major one, and you'll kind of run into those restrictions, and you kind of hit those walls, and it can get a bit disheartening and a bit demotivating. So a big thing is if you want to get into the game making as a hobby itself, then you do want to start small. You want to be able to make games that you can do in a couple hours, and then move up from that to make a game that you can make over a weekend, and kind of move up your scope from there. Because it's really easy to get disheartened in this. It is very complicated. It's a lot easier nowadays, at least with how far engines and stuff have come. But you'll hit a point where you just don't know what to do, and it's your game idea and your game mechanics, so you can't really just Google like, how do I do this? And this is why it's usually a good idea to clone games for your first time, and then add that 5 to 10% we talked about. Make Pac-Man, but now there's up 10 times the ghosts, or the map is 10 times the size, or maybe there's weapons, maybe Pac-Man gets a gun for some reason, or maybe it's a stealth game where the aliens patrol and you have to sneak around. You can
add a jump to Pac-Man.
You make the base game, and there's lots of tutorials on how to clone these games, and then what you learn from the tutorials, and then I have this knowledge, I think I know how to expand it, and then you can start adding that like 5 to 10%. You'll kind of know when you're ready to kind of go off to make your big game. But it's one of those things where even if you have that big idea, always write it down. I always put it in a book. You never know when eventually you might get to that idea, or something might come up, or you might just want to share it with someone. I have ideas that pop randomly in my head around mechanics, and I always just make sure to write them down. And I know I'm probably never going to get a chance to implement them, but you never know when I might meet someone who can, and I can share that with them.
Yep. So let's look at Val's question, because I think that's a really, really good one to address. That's something that affects a lot of people. One of the things that always kind of discouraged me from dabbling into game design was not really having any drawing/artistic talent. I consider myself decent at writing, but I feel like when you can draw good examples of things like characters/enemy concepts, world settings, etc., you have way more of an advantage than a writer does.
Yeah, this one could be a bit tricky too. I can't draw for shit as well.
Yeah, me
but I
either.
think this is kind of one of the important things of placeholders. And it's one of those things when you actually make games, you're not going to have your final art probably for a long time. But if you have good writing skills, that's actually very important. It's a really nice skill to have, because you can communicate then. And if you can communicate that to an artist, when you get to that point, you can get someone to make that art for you. And you can start with really rudimentary drawings. And you'll see that from a lot of famous game designers. If you even look at like a lot of Nintendo designers and their notebooks, their original drawings are they're not art. They use grid paper, and they just shade in about what they can, and gets the idea across. But it's just ideas onto paper, and if you can communicate what it should look like or what it should be, you can find placeholders that are close. There's lots of free assets you can use out there, and if it's just a hobby, you can use whatever you want. If you're not making money, it's fine. To kind of communicate the idea of what you want to do and what you want to make. And like I said, if it's just like a hobby project you're making for yourself, let's say you're cloning Doom, you can just grab, some of the Doom textures and put them in a game and play around with them, change them however you want, as long as you're not, releasing it for money or trying to monetize it or any way. Especially if it's just for educational purposes, it's usually fine.
It also makes the process of learning how to do it a lot more enjoyable. When I did my first sprite sheets for making levels out of tiles and sprites and moving sprites around on it and interacting with things, I used Secret of Mana sprites. You can find all the sprite sheets online with a really quick Google. If you're not marketing it, if you're not selling it, if you're not making money off it, it's totally legal to use them. You're totally allowed to just download them and play with them. That's allowed. You can't sell it. That's it. That's where you're stopped. And then when you're playing with these scenes and sprites and images from one of your favorite games, it makes learning how to do it quite fun. You're the opposite. You can draw, you can't code. So, working in a team of 2 on a game, I quite enjoy. Has to be somebody you like working with, somebody you're good at working with, somebody you can talk to all the time, somebody you can disagree with and continue to be friendly with. Because you're not going to agree with everything on the game. Honestly, I find when you're working in those little teams, those disagreements, when you finally come to a middle ground understanding, is better than anything either one of you would have ever come up with by yourself. It's a really wonderful thing. It's a great environment. And then when you can bring in complementary ideas like drawing and coding, you can make some really, really cool projects with just a couple people.
Yeah. A big thing when you start working with other people as well, we'll kind of touch on this later for game design. We're kind of focusing more right now on kind of like the individual approach of, just kind of like in games. A key thing to take into part 2 is when you start working with other people, you have teammates, you're now, it's like a group project. And I'm sure if people have had group projects in the past, especially for school, always can kind of be a nightmare because, you feel like balancing the load's hard. And then now all of a sudden there's a new skill that's kind of being involved, which is project management. When you're working on something by yourself, you kind of can just work on it when you want. It's good to have project management skills if, you want to complete it in a timely manner. And this is why I recommend doing things that are like games that can be done in like a couple hours or in a weekend, because you don't need to actually manage too much. You can kind of just do it and not worry about it. When you start working on games that, are going to take you weeks or months, you're going to have to break them down into, tasks and, plan out how long those tasks are going to be and when they're going to get done and some deadlines and stuff, because otherwise chances are, they're not really going to get work done. Especially if there's, 2 people, even if it's just like, if you're working with 2 people and it's only like a couple hour project, you're still going to have to now make tasks and do project management, because you have to figure out who's working on what and who's doing what, and kind of an idea of, when things will be complete. Because what will happen is if you don't really do that, you start working on your things, you can ask, hey, how's that stuff going? And they're like, oh, I haven't really worked on it. I haven't started it yet. And then all of a sudden, there can be some, cohesion that's not really going to be coming into place, as well as there can be some friction if the task isn't planned out and agreed on. So if you both have, a similar idea and you agree to it, cool, what's going to be implemented, and then it's in, written somewhere. Then when they implement it, you go back to it like, yep, that's what you did. If it's not written down or project managed in any kind of sense, they could do something. They could kind of spur of the moment, change things up. And you could also spur of the moment, change things up depending on what you're working on. And then when you show them, they're like, hey, this isn't what I wanted. This is when, like, I thought we were doing something else. I'm not really, too into this. And then all of a sudden, you can start getting frustrated.
Okay. I just found this free game design document template. I'm going to attach it to this video. A link to it. So when this is a VOD on Twitch, or if you're watching this on YouTube, the link's below. Okay? This is kind of what you want to find. Is something like this, where it's just a game design document outline. You don't need to use all of these. You go through and you just fill out what you can about your game. Okay? Title page, game name, working title. Most people go by working titles. There's no set in stone names until a game is registered and published. Period. Game concept. All right, that's like we were talking about. Just a short description of the game. That little summary bit. Genre. Again, not set in stone. You can use multiple genres. It doesn't have to be a one-word answer. You could be like some RPG elements, some elements from this style mixed with this, and, finally similar play style to this. It's a description. Yeah, target audience, me. Hey, thank you for the gift subs, Mole. Gift subs, welcome, Mr. Mole. Evolving Pond Scum. And Ross CKS I recognize. Welcome to the table. The rest of you lurkers, if you would like to be called out and said hello to, just say so. Lurking while playing with BFF, just wanted to say hello. Excellent. Hope you enjoy. Hope you learn. Hope you take on a project of your own someday because of this. That's my goal. I want people to actually create things. Game flow summary. How does the player move through the game? both through framing, interface, and the game itself. Yeah, so at this point, we're basically talking having an idea of how you play the game, beginning to end. You should be able to play a course of the game in your head. Mario, it would be like jumping over an enemy, jumping on an enemy, breaking a block. You know, that general just... How does the game flow? The player starts and runs to the right and avoids everything. Or deals with obstacles and touches the flag. Could be as simple as that. Yeah, jumping into a hole. I see you've played the game before. Look and feel. What is the basic look and feel of the game? What is the visual style? Does anybody need that explained? I think this is a really nice document. This is a really simple overview. Oh, geez. There we go. Now you can actually see what I'm looking at. I'll watch the stream. My screen isn't properly aligned to the window. Then gameplay mechanics. Gameplay. Game progression. How does one progress through the game? How does the game progress?
Or if it does, if there even is progression, or what's, how do things change?
Yeah. Mission challenge / structure. And again, if whatever your idea is, if you do have a good idea and you're like, that's not really relevant, just delete it, change the numbering. Or just say not applicable. This is a really, really nice basic structure though. Good to work from. Puzzle structure. So mission and challenge structure. What is the general goal of a level? How do you end and complete the level? The puzzle structure. That would be puzzles within the level, blocking the level. Are there even puzzles? Not every game needs puzzles. Objectives. What are the objectives of the game? Complete all the levels. Rescue the princess. Be as descriptive or not as you can.
And another interesting thing about objectives too is you can still put sandbox objectives in here as well. These can be kind of loose. So it doesn't have to be like a refined, win condition. You can put, player should, build a base, or player should, or has the opportunity to do this. Player has the opportunity to do that. You can kind of use that as your opportunity document as well of kind of, what players should be able to do if you're designing sandbox games. So like games like Kenshi, well, what should the player be able to do? Like, well, they can, level up their characters. They can get more characters. They can, build a base. They can do this. These are some objectives that they can do. Or things like Factorio, that one has a bit more of an end condition, but it can still be a bit more sandbox of, how the player goes about things.
There is a lot to do in Kenshi. Kenshi is a wonderful game. However, most people will only ever get eaten and never know the wonders of Kenshi.
Damn beak things, man.
Oh, man, the first time I saw those things, I had already been eaten by... Was it... Oh, no, it was the long neck things. Those cute long neck things?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd gotten... Oh, those are the beak things. Yes, they are. Okay, yeah. I'd gotten eaten by so many things. Like, everything was aggressive, and I saw them, I was like, oh, they're so cute. Have I finally met something... It's eating me! That was my experience with them. Damn beak things. Yes. If you're watching this and playing Kenshi and goes, that's my experience, just work on running. Build your running skill until you're faster than everything, and then you can start having a little bit of fun. I mean, the only reason my first game didn't end with me being eaten alive, Lucky, is because I died from bleeding out before the dog got to me to eat me. That's the only thing that saved me. How does the game flow for the game player? That's pretty vague. Does anybody understand what that means in the chat? How does the game flow for the player?
The important thing to think about is diagrams and workflow, states.
How would a turn work? Sort
Yeah.
of.
Yeah, it's
Potentially, if there are turns.
Yeah, how is the interactive, like how is the player going to interact with it? What's the interaction going to look like? What's what the state's going to be? How does the game start? How does the game end? How does the game restart? Kind of all that stuff. How do they perform actions? And if it's a turn based, then the game flow is the player makes their actions and chooses them, and then they wait their turn, and then they get their turn back again, and they continue doing that, all that kind of stuff.
You'll often hear us refer to the play flow of a game that we're playing as the core game loop. The main cycle of playing the game. You could really boil the play flow of Chrono Trigger down to encounter enemy, defeat it, explore map. Or explore map, encounter enemy, defeat it. If you really just do this and progress through the game and don't read any of the story, you'll still progress. You'll just be really lost. So if you took Diablo, it would be beat enemy, explore, get loot, buy new things. Yep. And then you're just getting better gear to beat better enemies, to explore farther, to get better gear to beat enemies, to explore farther. And you'll eventually get through the game. Something we all love to talk about. Mechanics. What are the rules to the game? Implicit and explicit. Everybody understands implicit and explicit? This is the model of the universe that the game works under. Think of it as a simulation of a world. How do all the pieces interact? This actually can be a very large section. Yes. Yes. The mechanics of a game is deep. And people often ask us, what do you mean by mechanics? I'm happy we're doing this now, so I can just point people to this video from this point forward. Yeah. It's gonna be great. Depends on the game.
Yeah, it really depends, because certain games can be very mechanic heavy, like action games are very mechanic heavy, especially fighting. But then games that are story driven, or focus more on the writing or maybe the art style, don't really have to have a lot of mechanics, because maybe you're just kind of moving around and looking at things. But where the kind of bread and butter of the actual game comes from is the story that's conveyed and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, as an example, the mechanics aren't super important in a walking simulator or like a meditation relaxation game, stuff like that. They're going to be pretty light on mechanics. They're going to be much more about the gameplay, the art style, the audio, stuff like that. Dating simulators, visual novels, very, very light on mechanics. Visual novels are often so light on mechanics, I don't even consider them games. You just sit there and read for 4 hours. Is it really a game?
Let's see if there's choices, maybe. But yeah, like I said, there's different mediums for things. Maybe some sort of interaction. But even defining games can be kind of loose. Like they've been kind of debating what the definition of a game is for a long time, and it's basically just comes down to an interactive system of rules and restrictions.
Yeah,
and that's kind of
the key
it.
being interactive. You
Yeah.
gotta let me do something. So physics. How does the physics universe work? Do you have physics?
Or do you
If
just
you're a
have to
card
have
game,
physics?
you probably don't. Card games don't need physics. Mario has simple physics. Things are pulled down. Generally. Unless they're shot. Movement in the game?
And this is another one that can kind of change from game to game. Like
Yep.
I said, action and combat, you're controlling someone. But in games like City Skylines or Sim City, there's still technically player movement. You know, they're not controlling an individual character, but they're still, you know, moving around the screen. And like, how will that work? You know, is it when your cursor hits the edge, does that move the camera? Do they have to use arrow keys? You know, do they have to hold right click to drag around? There's still some sort of movement. So you kind of want to go on, how is the user going to interact with the environment? How are they going to explore the environment? You know, what's movement in that sense going to look like?
You could really call it camera movement at that point.
Kind of.
That helps solidify it a little bit more in understanding, right? Because in all cases, a player in a game boils down to being a camera watching things happen. In a character action game, like third-person action game, the camera is tied to the player's location.
Yeah. Only difference then is they're also like text adventure games that have movement.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair as well, and that is still movement. How do you move around? And that would be what we're talking is like move west, move north, you know, open door.
What can you walk through? All that kind of stuff. How far can they move at once? All that kind of good stuff.
Yep. And then, you know, like we said, you can do as much or as little as you want in these sections at the beginning and come back and fill in more details later, or as you have ideas, fill it out. So don't get stuck on a section. If you're like, I'm not sure, then just keep going. Fill in what you got, and then use what you have filled out to help fill out the rest. Objects. How to pick them up and move them. That's pretty limiting, game.
I think it shouldn't be how to pick them up. It should just be game objects and how the player interacts with them. And a game object is literally basically anything that's in that kind of magic circle that I talked about earlier. So for for soccer, a game object would be the soccer ball. It would be the nets, you know, and also the other players. Anything that's in that system, that's contained in that, you know, illusionary kind of system, that becomes a game object. And how do they interact with them, right? Well, the soccer ball, you actually physically kick it around and move it around. Players, you know, you're not really supposed to interact or hit them or do anything like that. And then the net, you know, is just kind of a stationary thing that the user doesn't actually really interact with. You know, it's mostly supposed to be getting the ball into the net, but there's still, you know, rules around what you can do. I'm sure you're probably not allowed to just like climb up on top of it and hang off of it. Build a wall of players in front of the net. Don't let completely block off any chance of people scoring.
Okay, I rephrased it because I looked through it a little bit, and nowhere does it ever define what the player object even is in this guide.
Yeah.
So let's just put it in with the objects. What is the player object? Make sure you define that. You need that in there. That has to be stated and understood. It can't be... You don't want anything on this guide to be explicit. Or implicit. Implicit. You don't want it to be implicit.
Yeah, and not all games will have a player object. There's kind of different dimensions of games. It's a bit more of slightly more of an advanced topic. It's kind of strange, but there's a 0-dimension games, 1-dimensional games, 2-dimensional, all the way up to kind of like 3-dimensional, and that kind of has to do with movement as well. It's something which we brought up on like how like movement goes in the game. And an example of a 0-dimensional game is like 21 questions or like Truth or Dare. You know, there is no, you know, pieces. There's nothing there. There's no actual physical space that the game takes place in. It's all, you know, in the mind. So there's no, you know, movement. There's no nothing. It's 0 dimensions. And then a 1-dimensional game is Monopoly. Mm-hmm. Even though it looks, you know, it's on a 2D board, you only go in one direction, and it's technically, if you unravel it, it's a straight line that then loops. So that's, you know, a 1-dimensional game. 2-dimensional game is soccer. Technically, it's 3-dimensional with the inclusion of the ball's ability to go up in the air. But for the point of the example of, let's say, Game State, you know, it's a 2-dimensional game where you as a player can go up and down. You know,
chess.
You're not really traversing. Yeah, chess is a really good example for 2-dimensional.
Yeah. Pong is a 2D. Yep. Yeah, Pong's a good example.
Yeah, anywhere where you can go in two dimensions, like X and Y axis, so up and down and left and right. So you can go that, and then of course 3D is when you have depth. You know, 3-dimensional games or something that you saw, you know, when you started getting into more modern stuff, and even a lot of what we thought were 3D games back in the day were still technically 2D. Like Wolfenstein is technically a 2-dimensional game, because you are just actually going left and right. Doom was 3D because it had height. Yeah, it had height. Wolfenstein didn't have height. It was
Oh
just
yeah, right. Yeah, it was all one
once you add
flat
that
floor.
yeah, you get a z-axis. So when you can actually go up and down, that's when you become a 3D. And four-dimensional games actually exist, and they're really cool, but very complicated. Not going to try explaining them. If you're interested, you can go look them up. But people have made games that exist in the fourth dimension, which is you're kind of working with time and stuff like that, and it gets really weird and a lot of kind of I'm not even going to hurt my own brain thinking about it.
Yeah, I got a headache just starting to think about that. Yeah, let's move on.
2.5 is an interesting thing because that's more of a concept of the art and the kind of visual style of a game. What I'm kind of talking about here is the actual physical dimensions that the game can exist in. And like I said, like a zero dimension, technically doesn't really exist in our physical world or anything like that. And the point of kind of talking about is because the games like, Truth or Dare or 21 Questions, I kind of think of other stuff that's just in your head. There's no physical pieces of it. There's nothing. It doesn't exist. It doesn't move. There's nothing that can be traversed. So it's zero dimensions. And then 2.5D, it just kind of means either a 2D game that's viewed in a 3D on an angle, or a 3D game that's viewed on a isometric kind of render. But those games are still typically either just a 2D or a 3D game, just kind of viewed with the camera in a certain way.
So one of the 0D games we made in high school that we played a lot, like always played, was called Agreeance. And anytime there was an intoxicant involved where your mind state would be slightly altered, we would do our best, track it however we can, keep points, to get people to agree with us. You have to call the agreeance for it to be a point, though. So when the person agrees with you, you go, agreeance! And you get your point. And then you're always on guard. And it's just like a bunch of people trying not to agree with each other. And the whole point is you got to kind of get people to lose track of what's going on, and then come out with a statement like, man, Final Fantasy VI was amazing. And everyone's just like, yeah. You're like, yes, point. Yeah. That was a great game. Kept us entertained for days. The simplicity that a game can be while still being entertaining. Actions. Sorry, go ahead.
It turns out it doesn't take much,
No.
Humans can hopefully be fairly easily entertained.
Yep. We also made a game with a bouncy ball in those days where we had a square room with no windows, no carpeting. It was just like drywall and a wooden floor. Almost like a racquetball court kind of idea. And we would kick the ball around and it would bounce on the walls. It was crazy bouncy. And the other person has to return it before it stops bouncing. That was the rules. That was it. Kicking a ball around a room. Till we put a hole in the wall.
That's usually how that goes.
We played it for a long time before we did that. Like a month.
Yeah, actions is... Yeah, I'd say that the next two, or the next one, combat would kind of be like a subset of actions. But I would abstract combat to kind of just being more on conflict. And if there is conflict, combat kind of mostly goes towards... more of the mechanics, more of the actions that either the players are taking or, other game objects in the system are taking. You can have games where, you don't have combat, but everything else, does. People are trying to fight and kill you, but you're like a pacifist. But conflict is an important one too, because not all games will have conflict, and, the games that they have, they can do in different ways. So I'm trying to think of, there's a bunch of horror games that are like this too, where most horror games, you can't really fight the enemy, because then it wouldn't be like a horror game if you could just fight them. Yeah, Outlast is a good example. You just run. There's still conflict because things are coming after you. There's not combat. There's just kind of avoidance. Or even games that are kind of narrative driven. There's not really combat. I think in like Telltale, there's not really much of like a combat system. It's more narrative and decision based, but there's still actions that happen due to that. It's not just like a live action kind of Twitch feeling. I think there are certain parts where you have to click a button in a certain amount of time, but I wouldn't really call that a combat system. That's mostly just part of the interactive medium and kind of a bit of a skill check there, but it's not really like you're performing or adhering to a combat. Combat systems, when you do have them in a game, do kind of need to be designed and thought out. They are fairly important. What should the player be able to do? What and when and how and what's going on. And this takes a long time to tweak, and a lot of people still don't get it right, or there's no really to get it right, but it's all kind of just on based and feel and what your purpose of it is, right? Like there's some games that have combat and it's not really for, destroying the enemy. Sometimes it's just to get away from them. Maybe you're supposed to stun them and hit them and then you can kind of run away. And other games, you're looking at Doom where it's just glorious combat all the time, arena just gladiator messing things up.
Stop dying or stop moving and die. That is doom.
And then with combat as well, you want to start looking into how, what are they combating with? And if it's, other players, well, okay, well, how is this going to kind of be balanced? Should they be on the same terms? Maybe it's imbalanced for some certain way, or maybe, one player is stronger but slower, and the other one's, weaker but faster. Or there's also like, okay, well, maybe it's, non-playable characters such as, a boss fight and stuff like that. And you kind of have to design, well, what should the boss be able to do? And when you're making, virtual games like video games, you can kind of do a lot of kind of cheat stuff where you can input read, you know exactly what the player's doing, you know exactly where they are, you know exactly where they're going. Technically, the system has everything it needs to be impossible to beat. You'll notice this with Pong. I tell most people when they get into game, start making games, make Pong, because you'll notice right out of the gate when you make that AI, you're like, oh, I'll just make it follow the ball. And then you'll notice that the computer can just do that perfectly if there's no restrictions in place. And then the AI just becomes perfect and it's impossible to win. And then you have to design, well, how is it going to be the imperfections? Like, how is it going to be flawed? What are the flaws in their combat going to be? What's the flaws, that'll allow the player to have, an advantage, and stuff like that will need to be kind of designed and kind of prototyped out.
Yeah, unfortunately, the easiest AI to make is the one that's the most impossible to beat.
Yeah. You just input read, know exactly when you're attacking to block it, know exactly where you're going to go.
Which is why we praise the Dark Souls games so often. Because they're actually easy to beat if you understand everything that's going on. You can reliably recreate situations where you will win all the time. But the first time you do, it's so well designed and things are so well laid out and balanced that it is difficult. Mr. X from RE2 Remake. Yeah, that would be an easy one. Just follow.
Remember the Cyberpunk? I don't know what that thing was, that freak. I can't remember what the terminology was for those things. But like, you just jump over the box and the AI is just like, I'm going to keep doing this until I break.
That was my favorite Cyberpunk video. From all the ones that I've seen, that was my favorite one. Suda was like, yeah, I killed this enemy that was like 15 levels higher than me because it just couldn't hit me because it was rolling over a box.
I just went circles around the box and it just kept rolling over the box and it didn't attack while rolling. And I just kept shooting it. And it took a long time because it was a high level thing. And then eventually it just died. I don't know what I just killed, but I cheesed it. It was to the point where if I didn't do it quick enough, if it shot me, I would basically just one shot me. So it was really strong. I'm pretty sure I was supposed to kill that early, but I'm like, hey, found a way to break your state. And that's kind of things you go into combat design. It's for those games, it gets really complicated. AI is a huge field, and it's one of those things as well. It's computationally intensive, so you can't just unfortunately do a lot of kind of perfect or robust AIs. You kind of still have to put in a bunch of a bunch of restrictions, and then you kind of fall into that state of what should have happened there. The way they should have changed that is that there should have been kind of a behavior tree, and it should have been tracking what behaviors it has been performing, what it has done, and there should have been some threshold being like, hey, have I been doing the same thing for a long time? Okay, if I've been doing the same thing for a long time, let's kick that behavior into a check to see what I should be doing. And if it's like, oh, they're just patrolling around, if they've been doing that for a long time, okay, that's fine. Maybe they'll say something or do something. But if it's something like, hey, I'm doing an evasive roll and I've done the evasive roll for my last 5 actions, maybe change it up or do something else or kick into some different behavior. And that would have, made it a bit more dynamic. If it was like 3 times it noticed and all of a sudden the AI is like, okay, I'm getting, state locked, time to flip the state. Maybe I'll do a retreat behavior. I'll, back off and not be so aggressive, stuff like that.
Yep. Absolutely. We got a little deep there, but that was worth it. I think some people understood at least what you were saying.
Yeah.
We were still on actions before we renamed conflict, weren't we? Including whatever switches and buttons are used, interacting with objects, and what means of communication are used. There's a few loaded terms in there that it's the average person may not fully understand.
Yeah, it's mostly just interactable events in the system. With any game objects that are interactable, what they can do, what they should do. This is anything from, and for game objects as well. That's not just always physical things in the game. They can also still be, kind of illusionary things like a timer or health. A health is technically a game object. It's interactable state. It has different changes. You maybe not be able to directly interact with it, or maybe you can. Maybe clicking on your health bar in a game does something. Maybe it shows how much you have left or how much damage you've taken. Those are all kind of things. And another example of kind of non-direct interactionary events. I know I've been on soccer so much. I can any sport. I'll use hockey. In hockey,
yeah,
you've got
hockey.
a giant scoreboard. It's not part of the actual inside the game itself, but it's something that relays information. It's an object that's still in the game, not directly interacted with by players, but the players can still observe it. So it becomes kind of an observable game object, and that's still kind of an action. It's, well, what's this part of this thing doing in the system? Well, the point of it is the player can't interact with it directly or make changes to it, but they observe it and they observe state, and that leads to other actions.
We'll get to environmental design and stuff like that later, Rubido. This section is actually specifically gameplay and mechanics. We're under the mechanics area. Environmental design doesn't usually fall under mechanics. I can always come up with some extreme situations where we could make it fall under mechanics, but that's the edge case and the exception, not the rule. You touched on switches and buttons. That's pretty self-explanatory. Interacting with objects, yes. Outside game objects. Means of communication. Why would they be talking about means of communication when we're talking about actions between objects?
Well, you can communicate between objects. Like, how are they going to communicate? Either to the game itself, how they want to communicate information they have, or how they want to communicate with other players in the game, whether they be NPCs or whether they be actual other human players.
100%. Okay. Now, conflict we may have to talk about for a little while, because while this is a very simple one-line thing, turns out conflict is extremely complicated as a subject. There's a lot of different forms of conflict.
Yeah, and this can go from like the writing, so like the story kind of conflict that's going on. It can go from individual conflicts that happen within the game itself. Conflict just, is kind of just a fighting over a state change. Things are going to change, and maybe there's two or more entities that have a stake in why it's changing and how things are changing, and that's kind of what it boils down to. Is something is changing. There's things that want certain things to change a certain way, and the conflict is between those entities themselves, and it can be, like I said, there's not just going to be one conflict. So I'll go back to, I'll use hockey again. The conflict in a game of hockey is you're wanting to win. You want to be better than the other team. You want to score more goals than the other team. But there's a lot more sub layers of conflict in it. In a face-off, it's between two players. The conflict is getting access to the puck, getting the puck to your team. And then for other games too, there's conflict over the whole story and all this other kind of stuff.
Hockey is actually just a big stream of micro conflicts. That is the game of hockey. There's just a constant small battle over the puck. There's a board battle. There's an open ice dodge or hit. There's a battle behind the net. There's a battle in front of the net. It's if you use a conflict model, it's this lovely, beautiful string of conflicts. Players against the refs, refs against the world.
Refs against themselves.
Yeah. They are their own worst enemy this year.
Yeah, and then, like I said, conflict can also be, the granular level of things, the story, what's going on. It can still be personal conflict. There's kind of a lot going on. It's very loaded, and I don't know if we have to cover it too much for kind of what we're doing for indie amateur game design. That's mostly kind of goes into, like
we're getting into game study almost. But are there any questions? Have there been any questions about objects, actions, conflict? Is there anything that you don't 100% understand? Even if it's a 90% understand and you just want someone who knows 100% to confirm that last 10% for you, that's a good question. There's no bad questions. There's no waste of time questions. Ask questions. Questions are how we learn. I'm not sure how that detail got past playtesting because it's easy to figure out. No such thing as stupid questions in study. Exactly. And it almost has to happen. Otherwise, Mr. X becomes frustrating. and no fun for your average player. If you can't just be safe in a save room, that's just a horrible experience.
Yeah.
I guess conflict in Pac-Man is the player wants to collect the dots and the ghosts want to stop it. Yep.
And then there's still, like I said, like there's a lot of like micro conflicts that can happen. And then, when you hit the state where you can eat the ghosts, well, now, you're no longer running from ghosts. The conflict is now, I kind of want to, eat the ghosts for more points, if that's the case, and all that kind of stuff. But, the top level, most abstraction, that's kind of what you want to go for and what you'll put in your design document. And then you can kind of outline the rest of those stuff as kind of more as mechanics.
I guess it's valid enough to have its own section. Economy.
Yeah, it's kind of if it's necessary or not. This is one that'll people will always think it's just for multiplayer games, but there's a lot of economy that goes into RPGs. If you think even games like Skyrim, like what would happen if you just never got any gold and you couldn't actually buy anything? And it's like, well, maybe that's on purpose because maybe they're supposed to be a thief, or maybe they're supposed to get things from direct from quests. They're supposed to find them, or what happens if they get too much gold all the time and it was too easy and now they can just buy all the best stuff in the game. So
you mean if it was Skyrim?
Yeah. So exactly. So, and like I said, that was probably an intentional design because Skyrim is a very kind of casually designed game. They don't really want to make it too hard for you. They kind of a more sandbox approach and let the player play how they want to do. Right, the player doesn't want to buy all the weapons. If they want to steal them, they can. They have kind of given them these tools to do that. But yeah, economy is one of those things where a lot of people think it's just like WoW and MMO stuff, and that's like even a lot of economists are trying to figure out kind of what is going on in some of these virtual worlds. Very complicated, but economy is still important in smaller games. If you have any sort of currency, any sort of even just points that can be spent, any sort of transactions, you're going to want to pay attention to, the economy, how expensive things should be, what the difficulty should be to get that, kind of figure out what the inflation of, how much, I guess, gold or money or whatever the player will have, like they'll start off poor and then eventually get a lot more money. And what point do you want them just to be able to, feel powerful and have all the money, or do you want it just to be something that they'll always feel like they don't have enough money? Maybe it's one of those games that's very hard and you have to manage resources, and that's just a resource that's not there as well. And transitioning into that economy also goes into resource management games. It doesn't just mean money. It can be how are they spending workforce, or how they spend a specific resource, or we've been playing State of Decay 2. Technically there's an economy with we're spending ammo, food, construction materials, all that stuff to build certain things, and you need to kind of balance that, how much materials you can get. And that's one of those games where it's probably just because the difficulty we're on, but the economy is very broken for the materials that you can find. It's very easy to get everything, so there's not much conflict there. There's not really any kind of like, oh, we're running out of food all the time, or oh, we don't have enough stuff to do that, or we really need to find that stuff. It's kind of like we just have too much to the point where it just starts expiring and we don't even care. Like we're basically just tossing a bunch of it away because it's so prevalent. The economy is so robust.
Why is there 3 million health potions everywhere to take, but still have regenerating health? Because combat could potentially be difficult enough that you need potions in combat, and you want to conserve them out of combat. The D2 is very generous, yeah. I would call it casual. Casual on normal. You can just jump in and dick around and have fun. And I think that's its style. And I think that's its goal. And I think that's really what it was designed to be done with. I think that's where they were going for with all the silly ragdoll and the crazy jank left in it. The casual just... that's how I see it being designed. I don't see it being another way. I bet you the hard mode is tacked on more for people that they think might want a more hardcore experience. And I bet you there's a lot fewer people playing that way. Saying Skyrim has so many items lying around and it's so easy to take them without getting caught. Yep, there's no reason to... Skyrim is super, super casual as well, in all the same ways. It just doesn't have the lovable jank or the multiplayer. Not lovable jank in that one. It's, oh, my computer crashed again, jank, and that's not fun. Lethal difficulty is a whole different gameplay. Yeah. That's the point I was just getting at. When you jack it up, it's going to be tuned very differently. But typically, the most work is done in one difficulty. Not always, but typically. That's why I like to play on the bog standard mode first. Let's see what the developer had in mind for most people to play. Because most people aren't going to change settings. They're just going to hit start and play the game. And you design your settings to assume that the person is not going to look at anything and just hit start. You want them to have a playable game experience. You shouldn't have to look at every single setting in the game to play the game. We do, but we're geeks. Where zombies are a joke on normal, you actually use stealth and go on scavenging missions or trading on lethal. Yeah, and it might be something that we get into some point.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be like, hey, jump in and join us. It would be us setting out to do something together.
Yeah, well, I really do appreciate how difficulty sliders are going too. And State of Decay has interesting ones where you can adjust individual kind of aspects of the game. You can make the zombies a lot more aggressive, a lot more difficult, but you can still have the resource management side of the game on easy or on an easier difficulty, which I enjoy because that's usually a problem that I think we're kind of hitting a point now with difficulty settings where we're not going to have that just kind of always bog standard, easy, medium, hard, and very hard and all that kind of stuff. We'll have those, but they're just going to be predefined values of this customizable view, because that's kind of what they've always been under the hood. Is those ones are just values that get set to the game that have to do with how much health the player has or how much health enemies have or how much damage they can do. There's always these values that got tweaked, and that's what difficulties were. They just never exposed those to the players. And I'm really loving how going forward we're seeing a bit more trust in the player to be like, yeah, we have these predefined, you can save with them, but if you want to make your own experience, you can do it, which is great because there's a lot of people with certain limitations that can't do certain things. Games that let you skip puzzles and stuff like that, if they're an action game that have puzzle sequences, that might be nice because some people just don't like puzzles. They just don't want to process it. It just takes away from the experience. And I'm one of those things where we shouldn't force people to be taken away from experience just because we believe that it adds to some greater cause. We can trust them that if they want to do that themselves, they can skip it. Or sometimes there's limitations to it. Well, maybe for some reason they can't. Or sometimes there's cultural references that can be used for a puzzle, and maybe someone playing it just isn't going to get the cultural reference, and they're not going to be able to do it. And then for other games too, maybe they really want to experience the story, but they just don't have the skills or the ability to do the actions fast enough, but they still want to be able to play the game and go through what the game has to offer, or even some down to the level of maybe just you can shoot guns and all that stuff, but you just can't stealth. You just don't have the patience for stealth. You just don't want to do it. So you just put the stealthing difficulty all the way low so that when you do stealth, the AI is just dumb and will never really kind of find you. You can, tweak it to how you want to play. And I'm kind of really excited to see how those things go.
Thank you, Sandbox Games. That's where this came from. Sandbox Games gave us this. Even if you don't like Sandbox Games, thank them. Send them the thanks. They gave us difficulty sliders. All right, screen flow. A graphical description of how each screen is related to every... so a graphical description of how each screen is related to each other and a description of the purpose of each screen. Who understands that one? We're getting into drawings and the grapicals and the visuals of the game. This is where you artisty types all come into your own. I mean, we can still do it. Wireframes. Yeah, wireframes. Well, we're still in the mechanics of the game. But how each screen is related to every other.
Yeah, so this is, scenes, basically, transition from scenes. And that's anything from main menu to options menu to the gameplay itself. How is each, gameplay interaction going to be? And this is things from, the actual playing scene where you're moving a character around to, cut scenes or, maybe to an options screen in there, or maybe even just, a inventory, skill settings, all that stuff. These are all kind of different scenes and screens that pop up, and how it is going to look, how are they going to relate to each other, and all that kind of interesting stuff.
And then a description of the purpose of each screen is fairly obvious. If you're not understanding very well, even after pseudo explains, you're like, I'm still kind of lost. Just start drawing all of your start, like all of the different screens, even the characters, how you interface with the game screen. You know, the actual gameplay screen is an important one too. Describe the elements on it. Wireframe things out. You're getting into the basics of UI and stuff even. What information do you need? Where is it going to be displayed? Stuff like that. Game options. We've already dug into this one a little bit.
Yeah. How much of this document is left? Just want to make sure that maybe we might have to skim some topics. I might just find out what's kind of important, because some of this stuff isn't really going to be very. There's a bit left. For just starting out, you can skip most of this stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe we might just kind of go do a high level overview of things. So.
Yeah, we can skim through some of them. The game options we've already talked about a bit. We don't need to go into as deep. What are the options and how do they affect the gameplay? That's literally just options. What do you want to let the player change before the game? We're seeing how transitioning between UI, menus, dialogue, main menu, splash screen. Yeah, exactly. No, thank God it is not Sunday yet. I just woke up. That's the start of my Saturday. Replaying and saving, it's self-explanatory. Cheats and Easter eggs, that's
replaying and saving has a bit. Okay, to touch on it slightly. It's a big distinction between a casual game and a hardcore game. Is the replaying and saving, and that's kind of has to do with punishment. And that's kind of one thing that when you're designing your game, you want to, when it says target audience, there's not always going to be like a target audience, but there's also just the kind of general feel of the game. An important thing that we haven't really touched on yet is kind of like casual versus hardcore. And I hate labeling games and putting them into separate categories, because there's a lot of games that seem like they're hardcore, but they can be played casually. And there's a lot of casual games that can actually be, very hardcore. And there's not really much of a definition to it. But what it really kind of boils down to is punishment. How punishing is the game? And that's where that distinction kind of gets kind of crossed over. So like looking at Dark Souls is a very much a hardcore game because it can be very punishing. When you die, you lose your souls, you go back to where you were before, you need to come back, and kind of redo what you had. A game that's more casual, you'd say, something like Tetris. Tetris is very casual in its punishment. When you lose, you just restart, you're good to go again. You haven't really lost anything. It's kind of the point of the game. Or other games that don't really have a death, they just put you back right where you were when you kind of hit that death state.
Often they fill your health even. It's like, wow, I died and gained stuff, thank you, game.
Yeah. And then kind of like how far back and how much losses happened is kind of the part of that. And then with replaying and saving, that's kind of when do you save, how much do you allow to save, how often do you allow to save. And there's a lot of games back in the day, mostly just due to technical limitations, you could only save in save rooms, which means that depending on how far away your save rooms are, that's a degree of difficulty. If there's always an accessible save room, if you can save all the time, the game's not really that difficult, because games like Skyrim, you can hit quick save and you can do whatever you want. If there's a big boss, you hit quick save and you can quick load and you haven't lost any progress. But other more hardcore games, when you lose to a boss, it spits you back a good maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and you have to kind of go back through, and it's a bit of punishment there. So that's kind of the difference between that and then the saving and being able to replay the certain states.
The idea of the save room was pre-Resident Evil, though.
Yeah, I just use it. That's one of the more popular examples.
Yeah, it's a popular one, but it's definitely not the birthplace of the save room. I'm just throwing that out there. Story, setting, and character. Now, you may start in Section 4. I know a lot of games start in Section 4 with their filling out information. They have no idea how it's going to play, but they know the characters that they want to be featured. If that's where your creative process starts, this is where your design document starts. That's fine. Don't feel bad. That's why I said skim through. Yeah, don't stick on one section.
Another thing as well is don't worry about completely filling out this document when you go to kind of make a game idea. It's not really supposed to be that formal of a process. You're kind of just supposed to have this as a template and a guideline and kind of just boxes to fill in when the ideas come. Don't try to do top to bottom and be like, I need to sort this out now. You can definitely just put in like, I'll sort that out later. You just jump right to story and setting and put in characters that you want, and then later on you can kind of go back and try to figure out maybe the mechanics you have and stuff like that. You don't have to 100% complete the document. You also don't 100% have to complete the document to make a prototype. As soon as you kind of have a good enough idea of, what the base of it is, and you want to try it out, you can jump right into, making a prototype, because you'll take what you learn from your prototype and then adapt your game design document.
Yeah, your first prototype is not how the game is going to end up. It is an iterative process, and this is not homework. This is just meant to give your ideas structure. So don't stress it. This is here to help you, not force you to do more work. Fill in where your ideas fit. Story and narrative includes backstory, plot elements, game progression, and cutscenes. Cutscenes descriptions, including the actors, the settings, the storyboard, or script. So this could be a huge section. I think that's fairly self-explanatory just reading it. I'm happy to leave it with there. If you know how to write a story, this is good enough. And if you don't know how to write a story, I'm planning a panel on it eventually. Coming. I love story writing. We'll talk all about... Nope, words just left my brain. Gone. Okay, back to reading. Story setting and character, story narrative, game world. And this is broken up into the general look and feel of the world, so you can have a nice quick one-sentence line there. Done. And areas, including the general description and physical characteristics, as well as how it relates to the rest of the world. What levels use it, how it connects to other areas, draw little maps, include images. This type of document, it's a DOCX, so it can have images and stuff embedded right in it. Just pop stuff right in. Give little labels. Solid. And then characters. Now, I could do an entire 2-hour panel about characters. Character writing is a complicated process. Each character should include the backstory, personality, appearance, animations, abilities, relevance to the story, and relationship to other characters. It's a pretty good sum up. If you have all of that generally understood of all your characters, you're going to be okay. Your story should flow and make sense. Levels. Each level should include a synopsis, the required introductory material, and how it is provided, the objectives, and the details of what happens in the level. Depending on the game, this may include the physical description of the map, the critical path that the player needs to take, and what encounters are important or incidental. So, level design. And 5.2 training level. We've already done a panel about training levels. Go watch it. Make sure you do before you make your training level, so you're not the next driver. Document is always 200% different at the end than what it was when started. Pretty much. Yeah, don't be driver. Don't do it. Interface, visual system. So UI, if you have a HUD, what is on it? What menus are you displaying? What is the camera model? Camera model is what I was talking about earlier. What is the camera? Is it just a camera that flies around like a God game? Is it tied to the player? Is the player the camera in like a first-person game where you're literally looking out the camera? This is where you would design that. Control system. How does the player control the game? What are the specific commands? Okay, we should talk on this one. This one deserves some time. Because it's not asking about pressing buttons here. Commands, specifically of the character, would be...
Yeah, so I'm trying to see where it is in the document.
Oh, I see. System. Yeah, control systems.
It lagged behind for a second there. Yeah, that's just how the player is going to interface with the game. This is a really interesting topic as well. And that's kind of like, are they going to use controller? Are they going to use mouse and keyboard? Are they going to use voice? Are they going to use text? How is the interaction? What's the interface they're going to use? What's that layer that's going to communicate player desires and actions into the actual game outcomes and game actions? So typically for most games it's going to be a controller, and then the controller is the left stick is going to move the character around, the A button is going to select, the B button's maybe deselect, or maybe Y will jump. So that's kind of what does the game player, what's the game controller going to look like? What actions get translated to what? And this can kind of go for a bunch of different things, because for a lot of games nowadays, they have different ways to interact with them, especially for the PC market. You have mouse and keyboard by default, because that's kind of what every computer has. But you also still have the ability to plug in a controller and play a game, or, maybe use a touchscreen, or, maybe use your phone. There's kind of, how are they going to control? How are they going to interface with the game? What, at the end of the day, this is more of on a technical level. For board games and stuff, it's fairly straightforward, because the player will usually either interact directly with it, or there's going to be some sort of game master that's going to be the one that interacts on behalf of the player. And that's it's complicated, but not too much in a technical sense. It gets really complicated for video games, because you have all these different hardware that you need to support. And it's kind of like, what you need to do is then abstract the actions into your game into commands. And then you kind of build a layer between, these different hardware inputs that then map to these commands in your game. And that's how you kind of see like remappable controller, remappable keyboard, because in the game, those are all just separate actions. And then they kind of just register and sign up certain, hardware events to those to perform them.
Yeah. So to put that into simple terms, what he's saying is, back in the day when the game was written, it was literally written, when you see this button pressed or this button pressed, do this. And that's why we couldn't change it. It was right in the code, intercepting that signal from it. Nowadays, what happens is the game level is written with a command jump. And then the command is sort of left with a string so that it can be poked by something. Right? And then on the other side, as the command comes in from the controller, the game looks at what the command is, or the button is, and then there's a mapping that goes, this button goes to this command, and it'll pull that string. And that allows us to change where they're going, but it also allows us to use multiple control types. Swap back and forth between devices. That's the layman example for you. Audio, music, sound effects. I don't think we need to go too much into that, but this is your audio design area. You can put files in, you can just describe what the sounds should be, where they should be, vague descriptions. Do have sounds though. Don't make a mute game. Don't do that. Don't be silent, man. Artificial intelligence. Not every game has it. We talk about it often. It's going to be a complicated area. If you understand AI enough to have an AI plan for your game, this should be fairly self-explanatory. If not, this is going to be an area of study for you. And it deserves its own panel. We can't just dig into it in a few minutes. But we have
panels.
Yeah, panels. And if you are really interested in hearing us go into areas of AI, use the redeem and just tell us to do it, and we'll gladly do it for you. Technical, target hardware, development hardware and software, game engine, network requirements. If you know this stuff, fill it in. If not, just leave it here, and one day you'll understand it. Blackboard is the best thing ever for this in UE4. Is that what you call... What is it called? Blueprints? Blueprints? Yeah, blueprints. And game art. Key assets, how they are being developed, intended style. Uses blueprints. Blackboard uses blueprints. Interesting. They've made another abstraction on top of blueprints. Okay. Oh, we're actually at the bottom of it. So is there anything you want? We can go into a little bit of AI.
Yeah, we can talk a little about it.
Talk a bit about and then
like what to do after you've kind of got your game design document done. But that could also kind of be into a separate panel.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Do a bit of that as well. I'm going to start organizing some game stuff, giveaway type thing here.
I'll briefly go over AI just to kind of, because it's still important, especially for a game design thing. It's just the technical implementations can be very limiting. So when you're making a game, if you're not, depending on what the game is, so if it's completely just human versus human, then there's not really gonna be much AI that's in play. If there's it can still be human versus human with some AI components. Such games like Tarkov, they have players attacking each other, but also just NPCs running around. Anything that needs to be controlled by not a human is going to be an artificial intelligence, and you're going to have to kind of spec out how robust and what the limitations of the intelligence are. For the example of Pong, we were saying that your bog standard AI for it when you're first implemented is you're going to get the ball to follow the piece, or you get the AI controller just to follow where the ball is. And if you do that, the computer can do it perfectly because it knows exactly where the ball is, and it's going to be a perfect AI that won't lose. And you have to figure out well, what is the limitations are going to be? Is it going to have a delayed reaction? Is there going to be certain cases where it's not going to know if the ball's going a certain speed? Maybe it's going to react slower, or maybe after a certain amount of back and forths it starts making certain mistakes, or maybe you just have a index of possible commands, and you also have a weighted value of mistakes. So the AI always knows the perfect move to make, but then you can implement some sort of variable that causes the AI to make mistakes, because similar to humans is kind of how you can implement it, because technically when a human's provided with a choice, there is always going to be what would be closest to the perfect move to make, but we don't always know it, so we'll make some random move, and then you kind of have to, with an AI, adjust that to not be completely random, but weight them to being like which one is the best move, or which one is kind of not the best move, maybe a 70% chance of working, and that stuff gets very complicated and becomes very complicated behavior trees. But at the very least, you need to design how the AI is going to kind of look and how it's going to feel, how perfect it should be. Should it be kind of smart? Should it be kind of dumb? Should it just be standing there? How should it interact with the player? But if you're talking about technical and hardware, a big thing for making your first game, for video games at least, is don't worry about trying to making on every platform. I find a lot of people kind of bog themselves down into engines or bog themselves down into technology because they want to be able to, they don't want to limit themselves right out of the gate. And I've fallen into this trap before too. And it was a reason why it took me a long time to get into Godot. And like Godot was one of my favorite game engines. And a reason I didn't use it for a long time is because you can't really export to consoles too easily. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to limit myself. But chances are these games I'm making are never going to get to console. And if they ever get big enough to get to console, there are places and people you can hire to do that for you. You can do it yourself. It just don't limit yourself right out of the gate. Just for hardware sense, if you're an amateur, so, just, make it, try not to make it too ambitious. Make sure that, you have what you have locally to run it and make it and stuff like that. So if you're doing, you don't try to do like a crazy MMO, if you're going to need crazy servers, if you don't have access to crazy server hardware, all that kind of budgeting stuff. Development, like I said, game engines. This is kind of what I'm going to transition to next of, what to do after the design's document done. So I'll quickly touch on game art and key assets. So game art's a really important part of most games. Some games, won't really have art, like text adventure and stuff like that.
VVVVV is a great example of a low art game.
Yeah, and some games can have a low fidelity art, but can still be high in game style. And their key assets are kind of like, what's the most important stuff, like player models, player characters typically, but things, like things in the background, like a barrel or like, maybe a banana that's around, isn't really going to be a key asset. You can maybe replace it with something else or remove it entirely. So what you're going to want to do when you're designing is figure out what your key things are going to be and try to figure out what their style is going to be. But if you're not really artistically visioned, which I'm not, I suck at doing that. I kind of just find out what needs to be there, and I do my best to find placeholders. And there's lots of free resources nowadays that you can get placeholders that will work just for you, just to get your idea prototype, to get them out there. As well as with marketplaces for game engines now, you don't really need to have to make your own assets. You can kind of just, come up with a key list of game assets you'll need, what you want, the kind of idea for style that you kind of want to do, because consistency is key. And then you can kind of browse these game markets around. They can either be built right into Unity or Unreal, or you can go even to the game dev market. There's a bunch of websites that will have, models. You can go directly to, a Blender market and find the models you need. And if you kind of have a style in mind, if you put down what they should look like and what the kind of general idea is, you can still kind of find models, even if they're not made by someone that knows what the style design is going to be. It can still fit your style and still pull them in. If it's like a low poly and maybe a low, or like a pastel color texture, you can still find a lot of that style that people just make and put online for free, or make and put online for packets that you can take and reuse. Or if they're free, you can typically modify them, or if you purchase them, depending on the license you purchase, you can typically modify them. But main thing is, don't worry about the game art right out of the gate. Prototype and get prototype assets first. It can just be stickmen. It can just be, you know, a box. It can be whatever. Just get something there. You can always replace it later. But an important thing to know is you'll have those files, and you'll have the, you know, the understanding of what the file size should be, how they're organized, all that kind of stuff gets sorted out. And then in the future, you just drop in the new updated version, and it should just work with your system. And then other than that, I'm going to go right into kind of what to do next. So, you know, you've got a game idea, you put it into paper, and, you know, now you want to implement it. You actually want to, you know, make it. You've done the first step of, you know, making game, and is, you know, actually creating the game. The game now actually exists. Maybe it doesn't exist in a physical sense to play it, but in the terms of, you know, philosophical terms, it actually exists. It now exists in a physical form on a piece of paper. The idea is out there. It just needs to be implemented. Implementation is something that will take, you know, many different topics, maybe different panels. But for modern day games, what I would say is look at the game engines that are out there. Come up with the game idea that you have, and then find a game that's close to it that exists already, and then see if someone's made a tutorial on how to make that game. A recent example for me is I've been making a kind of a multiplayer versus kind of racing game where you're playing as delivery drivers trying to deliver food around in a city. And you know, it was very daunting at first. I had it designed out. I have a design spec of what I kind of want to do and what I want to be, but you know, it's kind of hard for me to dive right into it. But then I found some tutorials on people who are making racing games. I'm like, okay, well, that's a start. You know, I can make a racing game. Okay, how to make an open world racing game, and that kind of gets me done. Like, I know car physics. I know how to put, you know, a car model into that. And then I found another thing that's like, okay, well, you know, this is a game about had a lot of menu interaction. Okay, well, I'll do that tutorial. Then I'll know how to, you know, make menus. And now for my game, I know how to, you know, have menus and do all that stuff. And then if it's networking, I found another game that goes on, you know, real-time networking. And you can kind of take pieces from all these other kind of games and all that stuff that kind of exists that tutorials for, and then just kind of take them and compile them into the idea that you have yourself. And that's a really important kind of skill to find and have when you're making games, is finding the resources to learn them, because it kind of just sucks to just read documentation or just read, you know, books on just programming and how to do certain mechanics. I love game engine architecture. It's something that I go into a whole lot. I'd love to do a panel on it. It can get really, really technical, so I'm not sure if there would be a big audience for it, but if anyone ever wants to talk about game engine stuff, I am in Discord and would love to. But yeah, for nowadays, I'd recommend Unity to kind of get your feet wet with game design. Unreal's really good, but Unreal's really good too, especially with blueprints. It can be a bit more technical. It can be a little bit more daunting because there's a lot of technical knowledge that goes into it. With Unity nowadays, there's so many tutorials out that they've really kind of eased the process. And there's also a lot of other stuff that you don't have to do any coding at all. You know, Construct's a good one. RPG Maker.
Let's just throw out the quick verification that Unity is not the shit engine that everyone seems to think it is. It is a totally valid engine. You can make perfectly fine games on it. Garbage in, garbage out is the issue with most of the Unity games. Okay?
Yeah. I think you'll fall into as well with a lot of games, and unfortunately the game industry can be a bit purist and a bit elitist when it comes to this kind of stuff. And you'll find that too when you're trying to pick game engines. People will just say, oh, I don't do this because this. And the most important thing is it doesn't really matter what you use as long as it gets the job done and you can finish it. You can choose a game, you know, a game engine that is a lot more optimized, has a whole lot more performance. But if it's harder to work with and you're not familiar with it, you're not going to get the game done. It's not going to matter, right? Your game could have been great, but if it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. If using Unity makes it a lot easier because you can, you know, maybe you've used C# before, or maybe you can use a lot of the builders, the prefab assets. If the game gets done, the game gets done, and that's the important thing. And that goes all the way up to even, you know, a lot of AAA games. You know, they just a lot of decisions they have to make regarding engines, and a lot of them are now moving over to like Unreal because it just, you know, maybe not the most performant thing for what they need versus an in-house engine, or, you know, maybe not verbose, but it allows them just to get the job done, which is, you know, very important. And things like RPG Maker and Game Maker, they'll frown upon, especially games that are game engines that have their own coding or have, you know, maybe no coding at all. They kind of get frowned upon just kind of due to purism, because people are like, oh, if you want to make games, you have to learn to code. They kind of put this gatekeeping attitude on things, and, you know, it's kind of bullshit. Like,
it is bullshit.
You don't need to. All you need to know is you need to have pen and paper, have an idea, and have a passion. You know, everything else is tools. And the people who are purist about game coding, it's like, well, you're using high-level abstracted languages either. Why not make your game in assembly? You know, why not have it be that performant? Like that gatekeeping is, you know, very negative and goes all the way down. It's, if someone can use something to make a game, then that's a good thing. I don't care really what it is, as long as you can make a game. It's a nice thing about sandbox games with modding and stuff like that. It doesn't matter. So whatever is easiest for you, that kind of, it's up to your skill set, what you have. You know, if someone has a coding background, then, you know, they'll be stronger for engines that provide coding. If you don't have a coding background, you know, RPG Maker and Construct and stuff like that, you don't have to code. And then maybe you prototype your idea, and then maybe you run into your limitations there, and you're like, okay, well maybe I need some code. Well, you can always port games from engine to engine. It's not as impossible as it once were, because turns out what the hardest part of making games is actually figuring out the mechanics and tweaking the values and making the settings. It's not so much programming the game. That logic and stuff, once it's figured out, you can translate it pretty quick between the different engines.
Yeah, you'll have the document already done. It's just a matter of moving some stuff over. Okay, if you've made a game in RPG Maker or Game Maker or anything like that, and someone starts giving you a hard time, here's the answer I want you to give them. Oh yeah? Well, let me see your game. That's all you have to say. Let's see what you've done.
There's a thing that Rubitor brought up too, is like RPG Maker is frowned upon because no one makes their own stuff, and that's another thing that kind of bothers me too. There's a lot of purism now with assets, and you're not really making a game if you haven't made everything yourself. And like, I think that's bullshit, because then when there's huge game mods, they just look the other way, being like, oh no, this is great, game mods are fun. And it's like, well, why can't we look at it the same way? When you make a mod for a game, you're reusing stuff that already existed. All you really did was tweak the game script around to make a new game mode, which is awesome. Like that's fine. That's the whole kind of point of it, is to be able to make new playable interactive things. And then it's just, like I say, it's annoying to me. Like, if people making, like, it's a lot of gatekeeping stuff, and it's a lot of purism stuff. It's fine. People can do whatever. People want to make a game, even if it's a complete clone, like whatever. I'm just glad that people are taking it as a hobby and making stuff. Yeah, and same with like the term acid flipping. Like, people are like, oh, they just acid flipped, and it's like, well, okay, well, where are the assets that you are making, right? And it's like, either you're going to make them yourselves and take 6 months learning how to do it and make it, which is commendable and a good thing to do, but not everyone has that time, or maybe has that budget. And if they can make a fun game with it, then who really cares? Like,
not everybody has that drive. Not everybody wants to be an asset creator. It's a massive industry. When you get good games coming out, man, it was a whole lot of different people doing a whole lot of different things that they were passionate about. One person can't have all that passion. It just can't be done.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard to, and even AAA games are so asset flipped, because they keep the libraries. It's not like when they make a game and they make a barrel that they're just like, okay, this is the barrel for this game. And look at the source games. The same red barrel shows up in like so many different games, and the same assets are reused. It's because that's the point of it. You have an asset library. It's a resource for you to use. And the problem that people have with asset flipping is that it's typically because style wise it's inconsistent, or it's reuse style. But I go back to the whole they're more closer to the game mods. When you make a game mod, all the game mods all are going to kind of look the same, because they're all based off the same game, but they're going to play differently, and that's kind of the point of them, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Gameplay.
So don't get discouraged if people say acid flipped, or don't worry about any of that stuff. Just focus on making the game. Find whatever tools you can help them make it. Don't worry about if it's going to be if you're actually the purest approach about really making the game. Just if you're making something that's interactable and fun, that's the whole point of the game dev hobby. You're just supposed to, it's a fun process, and it's exciting to show what you have. Don't get discouraged with people that will try to put you down for not making 100% things yourself, or maybe you grabbed a bunch of free stuff because you don't have the money to pay an artist, or buy high quality assets from a store. And it doesn't really matter. Start off small, and build your way up from there.
This branches out to everything in life. It truly does. If you only listen to the people that tell you you can't do things, or you shouldn't do things, or you're not doing things the right way, you'll never do anything. There's always going to be somebody to shit on you. Don't listen to them. Just go do it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it gets very common in a lot of these kind of creative pursuits. And I'm not going to put on any side of psychology or anything into this, but from what I've seen, sometimes it just people have insecurities, or they have they get jealous, and they just want to put other people down because they're not feeling great about it. And it just unfortunately happens sometimes, and it's something that everyone will kind of do at some point in their life. It's no one's 100% innocent in this, but it's a good thing to realize and try to grow from it. And if it's something that we've been doing in the past, and apologize for it, and try to make amends and go for in the future. And it's something that I used to do right out of the gate with certain game engines too. It's just kind of how things were for a bit back then. It was so common on the internet just just shit on Unity for the sake of being Unity, because it was newer, and all it's not. Aren't really making games anymore. Roll your own engine. I went to a game jam and tried to make my own engine in a weekend. What ended up happening is I didn't make a game. It failed, and it was not a good time. And it just we had an engine, but we just tried to do too much, and it's a resource to use. And it's one of the things where there's a reason why people use it. And another part of that too is you'll see that you're like, well, there's no AAA game made in it yet. It's like, well, yeah, because yet, there's a kind of a barrier to entry, and it's all it really is going to take is, one or two studios to make a AAA game in it, and then the other ones will, hop on over just due to, risk calculation and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean you can't make, a high quality thing in there. It may be harder, or maybe some limitations, but it's not impossible. Don't get discouraged from that. If you're really motivated and you really want to do something, go for it.
Absolutely. Do it until you're stuck, and when you're stuck, ask questions, and that is why our Discord exists. We've got a game dev channel, we've got a game art channel, we've got a computer question channel, full of people who actually know what they're doing and are passionate about these topics, do it all the time. Some of them do it even professionally. They love talking about it. That's why we're here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, need to shrink you. Somebody go ahead and Discord. There you go. That's where you want to go. And the last one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nope, that's not at all where I wanted it. Oh, look at that. It's perfect. It's perfect size. Second try was perfect. There's not many left. That's a fighting game if I remember right. BlazBlue. Now unfortunately, Saxo has left Discord and Twitch and internet, so I've had to re-give that game away. So Darth Maul is now the proud owner of Offspring Fling. Anime fighting game. That's what I thought. That's what I thought. This is our last giveaway, by the way. This is the last time. This is the last 7 games on the list. Nex Machina. No idea what that is. Actually, I don't know a lot of these, but I know 2 of them. Well, I guess I don't know half of them then. This one was one I knew. For Talos Wind. I'm sure he will enjoy Ruiner. I know Talos. I know his type. Talos is another really cool streamer. And game designer. So if this is the kind of thing that you actually like, go ask him some too. Definitely. He's got a really cool RPG called Gambit RPG coming out. It's a card game that uses an actual deck of 52 playing cards to be an RPG, where you're creating physical and magical stats and stuff based on what cards you draw. It's really interesting. Nex Machina is a pretty decent arena twin-stick shooter. Interesting. Ruiner is kind of a twin-stick shooter as well. That sounds sick. Followed. Yeah, man. Go check him out for sure. Hey, I'm almost 100% guarantee Egg already has a copy of Gary's mod, but I'm going to give him another one and he can give it to somebody else that can then be enamored by it. Pass part out the Starving Artist. I've never heard of that game in my life. That's a strange one. I'm happy to give BPN a strange one. BPN's doing a challenge to play all commercially released console games. Like on all consoles. Real hardware. He's just got shelves of consoles behind him with games and games and games and games and games. He plays random games all the time. And since that one's gone, there's only one left. I don't need to re-roll it. Emily is the Way 2 for Zelo. I have no idea what it is. It's like a email simulator computer interface. Came out in 2017. Indie game. Indie visual novel. That takes place through email and old chat and stuff, it looks like. Strange. People make strange games, and it makes me super happy. I love strange games. What have we given away? Oh, hundreds of games. Yeah, big games. Lots, small games, indie games. Name it. Yeah, we started giving away about 5 games a week at the beginning of lockdown last year. We were like, you know what? We've got all these extra humble games just kicking around. We're never going to use them. Let's throw them into a big pool together and just start giving away games every weekend to help keep people entertained during a kind of trying time for everyone where a lot of people aren't used to being locked in the house. Free games. Have some games. Something to do indoors by yourself. Seemed like a good thing to do, and we've been giving them away. That's a lot of games. It's actually a lot of games. I do the math on that. Once a week for over a year. 5 games a week. Sometimes more.
That is quite a few.
Yeah. Yeah, but we're done now. I don't have to do the game anymore. We could just go back to talking about whatever we want to talk about. So next week, even Pseudo doesn't know what's happening. Or no, not next week. Next week is Yakuza Kiwami 2 and Risk of Rain 2 for game reviews. And we'll be talking about those 2 games, which should be fun. 2 fantastic games. I expect a lot of goods on one of them. Actually, Yakuza Kiwami 2 might not get as many goods as might think. There was a lot of bug and jank in that one, but that was a good game. Good writing. The week after that will be what is a game meta and why does it evolve? Which should be a lot of fun. Yeah, ROR2. You'll have to come to talk about that one. I know you'll have opinions. Music's bad, right? Thumbs down. Right across the board for sound. Don't take me seriously. We did give it our favorite music of the year. Don't go writing hate mail. Don't send any bombs. It's okay. Unintentional 30-hour stream from you says a lot about that game's first time playing. Yeah, that's a lot of gaming, but it is a fantastic game. So it's time to go though. We got to wrap this up. I hope we helped you get started. If you have questions, don't be afraid to jump in the Discord, leave a note on the YouTube. We check them all the time. We'll happily give you a link to wherever you need to go to answer questions, help you out. Some people that make games even bounce ideas off me like, hey, what do you think of this mechanic? Where should we go with this? What's a nice way to change this up? You don't have to listen to my advice, but hey, maybe it's an interesting idea that pushes you in a fun direction. I love answering those questions, so definitely bring them. Pseudo does too. Pseudo loves those questions too. I'm not going to leave them out. Throw Pseudo some questions too. We have fun with it. But until the next time I see you, which may be later, maybe Monday. Hey, it may even be never. Probably not, though. I'll probably see you at least by Monday.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. Yeah. Monday will be the game that I'm just drawing a blank on, but it stars
Brutal
Jack
Legend.
Black. Brutal Legend. Thank you. I knew the game. I could see the images of the scenes. It's just names. Names in me don't work well. People should know this. So hopefully the game doesn't get my channel banned by DMCA, but if it does, then it was worth it, right? It's been a blast. Until the next time I see you, I'm Deus.
And I'm Pseudo.
And may all your shots be headshots.